For building a great nation, is it really required to work for 70 to 100 hours every week? This is what our Indian companies are saying, right? But here's one insane story about how Henry Ford, way back in 1926, made one outrageous decision that changed everybody's life, including mine and yours. And Henry Ford is no small man, right? And I'm sure this story will put to rest the debate whether it is really required to slog it out if you are building a great nation. Here's the story, and in the end, I'll also share my perspective of this from my experience and having worked with someone who recently made a statement about
what do you do sitting at home? How long can you stare at your wife? How long can the wife stare at your husband? Come on, get to the office and start working.
not staring at your wife? Yes, I worked directly with him. Here is my take on this issue and why such senior people in India make such statements. And I'm sure most of you won't agree with me. But first, here's Henry Ford's story. Okay, for the story, let me take you to the early 20th century when America was industrializing. It was absolutely insane. The factories were buzzing, the cities were growing, and as they say, a nation was being built. But this nation was being built at a brutal cost because the work hours was absolutely insane. 10, 12, 16 hours the workers used to work every day. It was as if the factory noises never stopped. And the workers, well, the life was hell for them. They had absolutely no time for eating, for sleeping. There was no time for them to spend with their family and no time to spend on their health. Okay, so the context is now set. Let's turn our focus to Ford. Okay. So in 1913, Henry Ford's Highland factory became the first factory to install the legendary assembly line technology. Now, this assembly line technology not only helped Ford to produce cars at far cheaper rates, but also at a rapidly faster rate than ever before. And while this assembly line technology was helping Ford to build a great company, this assembly line was also crumbling. Just months after opening, the workers were leaving the company left, right and center. In fact, the labor turnover rate had reached a staggering 380%. It was just insane. I mean, these workers were putting an insane amount of hours. The work was back-breaking and this was repetitive in nature. The workers had absolutely no life and therefore they wanted to get out of this factory. Now, Ford had this huge problem. And by the way, this was not only Ford's problem. This was happening throughout America in all its factories. So Henry Ford had to act really fast. Now at that moment of time, the other businessmen in America, they were really saying, push for more longer hours. The more you work, the more you produce, the more you make money. But in this context, Henry Ford makes a decision that's so shocking that not only puzzled his competitors, but also his own men. What was it? And how did it not only change Ford's fortunes, but also how we work today? So, here is when things get really interesting. In 1926, Henry Ford makes a shocking announcement. He says that factory workers in Ford will not work for 6 days anymore. In fact, they will just work for 5 days a week and only 8 hours every day. That meant Henry Ford established the 40-hour week in America. Now you have to understand the context of this. This was at a time when America was industrializing, right? Everybody wanted more work, more production and more money. So when Henry Ford decides to cut the amount of working hours, people go insane. And critics really thought that this was a decision that would finally be responsible for the destruction of the Ford company. Oh, and not only does that, but he adds something extra to the offer. Henry Ford doubles the pay from 6 hours a week, 9 hours every day to $2.50 a day. Henry Ford doubles the pay to $5, 8 hours every day and 5 days a week. But wait, was Henry Ford doing this really out of kindness for his people? No, because here's the twist. So, Henry Ford had this daring vision that nobody else could see. Henry Ford was not just thinking about his workers, he was actually thinking about his customers. Now, let me ask you this question. If you work for almost 16 hours every day for 6 days a week, will you really have time to spend with your family, to go out shopping, and really to go out and buy a car? And that is what Henry Ford realizes. He realizes that if all the workers in America really don't have the time to go out and spend money and buy cars, then what really is the purpose of mass producing these cheap cars? So Henry Ford wasn't just changing the work schedule. Henry Ford was reprogramming the entire economy. He knew that happy, rested workers not only meant more productivity, but it also meant that these workers would remain with this company for a longer time, which meant lower costs for the company. And eventually, when these productive workers produce more cars, it meant more money for the company as well. So this 40-hour work week wasn't just an act of generosity, it was a game changer. And the impact it had was nothing less of astonishing. See, we are talking about building the nation, right? Now, by reducing the work hours per week, what Henry Ford did was that he created this new breed of middle-class Americans. Middle-class Americans who not only worked in the factories but were actually buying those very iconic Model Ts. He had turned his workers into loyal customers. But then, what Henry Ford did also revolutionized the industrial world, because a lot of companies had to follow suit. They also had to come out with 40-hour week policies. Some did it because they saw the results that this policy was bringing in, but some had to do because of competition. Because companies like Chrysler, GM, workers wouldn't work in those companies. Everybody would run to Ford. And this had a huge impact on America's work culture. And this eventually led to 1938, when American made it legal and by law to have 40-hour work weeks. And eventually this 40-hour work weeks and 5-day working weeks eventually made it across the world. And that was one of the reasons that people throughout the world actually have the Saturdays off. That's nation building, my friend. So, can an Indian company ever do this? And what's your take on this raging debate in India about work-life balance? Here's my take, and listen carefully. See, work-life balance is a choice. It depends what your priorities are in life. Is your priority spending good time with your family? Is your priority about having the time to follow your passions, to pursue your passions, painting, music? Then you should not work in companies that do not value work-life balance. But if your priority is career, is ambition, and you really want to climb that success ladder before anybody else, right? If you want to build something like a Zomato, like a Zepto, like a Paytm, like an urban company, you have to sacrifice work-life balance. You do not get the best of both the worlds. And this, I have seen it personally. See, we recently heard this statement, right, of a business leader making a statement about working on Sundays and not staring at your wife. I'll tell you what goes on behind the scenes. These business leaders actually work for insane amount of hours. They have almost negative work-life balance, if such a thing even exists. And when people give so much of their life into work, it becomes a natural thing to expect people around them to put in as many hours as well. It's almost like, if I can do it, so can you, right? The only problem is when so can you changes to so should you. So here's my take. Do you agree with this? Let me know.